Good morning, everyone. Happy New Year. Hope the new year has begun positively and safely and healthfully for everyone. I'm Tracy McKibben. I'm the chair of the Finance Committee for the Authority and the New York State Canal Corporation. I'd like to welcome my fellow committee members, John Comel, Dennis Trainer, Michael Balboni, and Eugene Nicandri. I'd also like to welcome our team members at NYPA and the Canal Corporation. This meeting has been duly noticed as required by open meetings law. I call this meeting to order. Everyone's had a chance to review the agenda. I asked if there are any amendments to the agenda. There being none, I ask for a motion to adopt the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? The agenda is adopted. Thank you. The next portion of this meeting will be held in executive session. If I could ask for a motion to conduct an executive session to discuss the financial and credit history of a particular corporation pursuant to Section 105 of the Public Officers Law.
So moved.
So moved.
I think there's a second in there. All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carried. We will be back with you shortly. Great, thank you. I ask for a motion to resume the meeting in open session.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carried. There were no votes taken during our executive session. All of the committee members were polled prior to this meeting, and in terms of any conflicts, and they've submitted all of those potential conflicts to the corporate secretary for inclusion in the minutes. We'll now turn on our agenda to invite Thomas Spencer, Senior Director of Enterprise Risk and Corporate Insurance, and Adrian Lotto, Senior Director, Energy Security and Resilience Programs, to present an update on our risk items.
Okay, thank you, Chair McGibbon, and good morning. Good morning to Chair Como and other members of the Finance Committee. If we could flip to the next slide, please, that would be great.
It's me. So
Thank you. Thank you. So I'll be kicking off today's discussion on NYPA's Enterprise Resiliency Program, and then handing it over to Adrian to complete some of the details around the specifics of the program. But before turning it over to Adrian, I want to provide the Finance Committee a brief overview of the program's history. In 2017, the risk management team developed an enterprise-wide resiliency framework that leveraged the strong foundational elements of NYPA's existing resiliency programs. Those programs included business continuity, cyber and physical security, disaster recovery, and energy management. So in addition to harmonizing those efforts, the risk management team was able to establish an enterprise resiliency framework that broadened the scope of the traditional resiliency program to include items such as insider threat and supply chain resiliency. Once we were able to establish the framework and program, the program was transferred from risk management to utility operations and the enterprise resiliency team. Since that time, the team has done a lot of great work, and there are a couple of key areas of accomplishment I wanted to highlight today for the Finance Committee. The first is the successful build out and hiring of the appropriate subject matter expertise. This was a big challenge given the industry expansion and the view around the concept of resiliency and the demand for top talent. The second area I wanted to highlight was the development of policies and procedures that formed the concrete governance structure for escalation of resiliency risk. By building on the existing Executive Risk Management Committee governance structure, we were able to ensure leadership had visibility into the resiliency program and resiliency related risk. So there's been a lot of effort put forth by both risk management and the enterprise resiliency team, and then we work very closely together. But it's these efforts and others that has allowed NIPA to enhance and continue to advance our capabilities to anticipate and respond to disruption-related risk. So that's a quick overview of the history of the program. Happy to field questions. If there aren't any, I'll pass it over to Adrienne so she can get into specific details of the Enterprise Resiliency Program.
Thanks, Tom. Adrienne, you want to go ahead?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. Thanks, Tom. I appreciate that. So next, we will answer the question as to why resilience is important. Certainly in 2020, whether it was civil unrest, unfortunately, changing legislation, or obviously the impact of COVID-19, it is highlighted for all of us the importance of why resilience is important. So this slide is intended to highlight the ever-changing nature and dynamic of the world we're living in today, and why NIPA must be prepared to respond and bounce forward. Next slide, please. So Tom mentioned this, and I just want to touch on it a little bit. So as he spoke about earlier, we have a traditional service catalog, things like business continuity, disaster recovery, but I wanted to highlight 3 different things to note. So first, as he mentioned, we're going beyond traditional resilience in our program into what we're calling the expanded service catalog. And again, that includes things like insider threat and supply chain security. Secondly, it's important to note that each one of these areas incorporates a cross-functional team, a cross-business unit approach throughout the authority. So we're really trying to leverage one another's skill sets and break down silos of communication. And then third, each of these areas has a roadmap, both short-term and long-term, to reach a more mature resilience level here at NIPA. And if you move to the next slide, I'll speak a little bit about some of what of those key deliverables may be. So first, partnering with IT, we're going to be testing our business continuity plan combined with the disaster recovery drill later on this year. We're going to be advancing, as you know, resilience is a pillar in Vision 2030. So we're going to be we released an RFQ last year, and we're going to be moving into contract shortly to advance a climate impact study. We've developed mature resilience metrics throughout the organization and intend to cascade those down. And then finally, we are advancing an insider threat program with our partners at EPRI, very well known, I think, in the financial sector, but we're really breaking ground here at NIPA in the electric sector to advance an insider threat program. So we're very excited about that. Next slide, please. And so then how are we going to get there? The key here is leveraging both our internal partners and our external partners. So as I said, resilience is a pillar now in Vision 2030. We've incorporated resilience both into our mission statement and corporate values, and we've made investments, both financial and in human capital. We're going to measure our improvement, and we're leveraging champions in each one of the business units to really advance the mission of resilience throughout the entire organization and really make it a part of our DNA. We've advanced and to raise awareness throughout the authority, we've launched an Always Resilient campaign partnering with our comms team, but it doesn't stop there. So externally, we're also continuing to partner and work as well. We have existing relationships with some of our trade organizations like APPA, American Public Power, or the Large Public Power Council, or NATF, and they've been doing a lot of exciting work that we've been leveraging in the resilience space. We're also working with the private sector. So as you may recall, last year, we announced the Center of Excellence with Siemens, and we're continuing to work on that today. And we're hoping to deliver, and we've already started to bring resilience into the forefront for our customers. So I will pause there, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
So Adrienne, thank you.
Sure.
Sorry, there's a question. Go ahead.
Yeah, Adrienne, when you talk about insider threat, typically that's associated with a cyber risk, but here I believe you're utilizing it in a much broader category in terms of the risk profile to the enterprise, both physical and cyber.
That's correct. That's correct. We are looking at both physical and cyber, and we've also determined that the category that we're going to look at is both employee, former employee, contractor, and former contractors. So that's the scope of what will be included in that. And you're correct, it's both physical and cyber.
And then just in terms of benchmarking, you referenced a lot of the industry partners. We developed metrics for the implementation of this program based upon those benchmarks of those industry partners.
That's correct. So within our EPRI program, there's Duke, Southern Company, Con Edison, and several others. So we are developing those metrics together with EPRI and industry partners to incorporate them here at the authority.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I was just going to say, Adrian, obviously this is an important discussion and part of our program or, effort to be aware of all of the enterprise risk that we that the team is managing. And I think obviously after last year in the pandemic, we learned the importance of preparing for disruptions, and volatility is very important. So this is work that's needed. And so happy and excited about the update. Good work of the team. Any other questions from the committee for Adrian or Tom? Again, we will have regular updates around the different programs and different efforts to manage the risk throughout the enterprise. Great, thank you.
Thank you.
We'll now turn it over to Adam Barsky, EVP and Chief Financial Officer, who will present the next item around our OPEB liabilities and NIPA trust. Adam, over to you.
Thanks, Tracy, and the members of the committee and public. Today we're going to talk about OPEB. What is OPEB? OPEB is other post-employment benefits, which is primarily mostly retiree healthcare costs. The way the OPEB costs are recorded on our balance sheet is through an actuarial study, and they show up as liabilities on our balance sheet, unless we otherwise would have a funded trust to handle those liabilities. And we do have that in place at NIPA for NIPA's employees. We do not have such a mechanism in place for Canal's employees, which has resulted in a ever-growing large liability on NIPA's balance sheet. So after looking at lots of options and considering all the pros and cons and different things we could do and things that we will continue to do in the future, the recommendation that we've come to the committee for is that we transfer the Canal OPEB liability to the NIPA OPEB trust in the same way and handle it the same way as we are with other NIPA employees. And we would make an amendment to the trust agreement to include NIPA employees and its subsidiaries. The trust was created before the Canals came over to NIPA, so it wasn't envisioned at that time because they were not part of NIPA. But again, after looking at what's taken place over the last few years, we believe this is very much beneficial for the authority in protecting its balance sheet and helping our capital capacity while making sure we address appropriately all these OPEB liabilities for both NIPA and Canals. Next slide. As I mentioned before, we did consider a number of different options, pros and cons, setting up a separate trust, taking money back, or making other potential changes. And really that this is really the best alternative that we found in all of the options that we have looked at. And there are other things that can be done which are not mutually exclusive. So there'll be continued work in that area and coming back to the trustees later with various other options and recommendations down the road. But in the interim, this is really the most recommended course to take going forward to be able to strengthen NIPA's balance sheet and address the liabilities. The other big question that may have been asked is whether or not doing this and moving this would be irrevocable in the event that for whatever reason Canal employees went somewhere else or away from NIPA, or if we just decided that we didn't really want to do this and go back to the way it was before. This decision is not irrevocable. It is reversible. If any of those potential factors were to ever occur, this is not something that can't be reversed. At this point, I would open it up to questions of the committee if there are any.
Adam, first, a couple of questions, just so I can make sure I understand, because we haven't talked about what this potential liability is and why, you know, the team has gone through the effort to try to figure out the most efficient way and the best way to handle this liability. Can you share with us sort of what that amount potentially is that NYPA would then have to put on their balance sheet? And also, can you help us understand, you know, what was the level of funding prior to the canal coming over to NYPA that we're now having to absorb? Was there, you know, were there any payments made prior to them coming over, and how did that position the canal as we, you know, as NYPA took them over? Where did they stand at the point that we did that?
Sure, it's a very good question. So and some of this is really somewhat of a factor or function of the changes in the accounting rules that have occurred over time. In 2004, there was a GASB 43 that first started talking about OPEB liabilities, and that pronouncement had it where those actuarial liabilities had to be calculated, but they were only included in the notes to the financial statements. And that went on for a number of years, and it wasn't until the end of 2017, beginning of 18, there was GASB 75, which required governmental entities to not only go beyond just describing it in the notes to the financial statement, but to actually book the liabilities on its balance sheet, and as an adjustment to opening net position at the end of 2017, beginning of 2018, which is right around the time that NYPA had brought on canals. Prior to that, NYPA had established a trust, and they funded it with an initial amount of around $200 million, made a few other contributions, and that amount has grown over time because of the way the funds have been invested, and it more than covers all of the NYPA liabilities. When both the accounting change happened and the integration of canals to NYPA, that initial liability was $100 million that had to be placed on the books of NYPA. And future liability changes are based on actuarial assumptions that change based on mortality rates, cost of healthcare, and also by a discount rate, which is driven by an index tied to bond index, which as that rate goes down, as a discount rate, the liability goes up. So since 2017, that $100 million that was on as a liability for the canals has grown to where if we didn't do this, there would be over $300 million of liability on NYPA's balance sheet. So it has basically tripled in the last few years, really because of the way the actuarial calculations are being made. So by moving the canals into the NYPA OPEB trust, we are able to not only reduce the liability overall because of the actuarial calculation for it being in a trust, but it removes it completely from the NYPA balance sheet, which strengthens the balance sheet and allows for our borrowing capacity or capital capacity to expand as well, to give us more flexibility in the future to meet all of our capital demands. So this is really, as I see it, as a win-win for NYPA to be able to maximize the use of its resources in a way that allows us to continue to move ahead stronger and being able to meet all of our capital liabilities going forward.
Madam Chairman?
Yep.
Yes, go ahead.
Let me see if I understand this this process here. When the legislature said that the Power Authority was going to take over the operation of the Canal Corporation, that was in lieu of about 90 to $100 million a year that was being swept by the state of New York, and that was about the operation and maintenance cost of the Canal Corporation. And in normal circumstances, I would think when there's a merger or an acquisition of something like that, the acquirer gets to do due diligence beforehand. Well, we didn't have the luxury of that because our due diligence is occurring after the fact. And, you know, as it turns out, as I understand Adam's presentation correctly, we inherited a potential $300 million obligation liability that is on the Power Authority's operating budget, and we have to disclose that on a regular basis. So not having the benefit of due diligence beforehand, in addition to the $100 million or so that the Power Authority puts into the canals each year, hopefully we're going to reduce that with the Imagination project. But we have this OPEB liability, and it seems to me what's proposed here is in the best interest of the Power Authority to minimize the effect of the lack of due diligence beforehand. So I would be in favor of approving this change, and I just wanted to indicate that on the record. But that's the history as I understand it. And if I'm wrong, somebody please correct me.
You will not be corrected.
Well, I guess what I want to add here, in deference to Adam's, this is Finance Committee. The presentation was a lot of words, but no numbers. So I just want to ensure that Adam's recap of the numbers makes its way into the dialogue and make it clear that we've been studying internally and with the board this proposal for over the last few months. Well, this is the first time it's made its way to public session. Everyone's been doing a lot of work on this, and as everyone's just recapped, a pay-as-you-go plan that we inherited, costing us $20 million operationally a year, as a component of the $100 million plus that we fund for the canals. $300+ million liability that compromises our ability to raise financing in the markets. We've already got an overfunded off-balance sheet trust that was appropriately established, and this is proving to be a very effective utilization of that trust to help ourselves operationally as well as in terms of balance sheet leverage. So I think it's a very creative and constructive solution. I appreciate the efforts over the last couple, 3 months and the back and forth with us to ensure we had a full understanding of all the options that were considered and vetted. And I agree with the judge that said a very appropriate proposal and solution. Won't call it a problem, but to a consideration that's highly impactful to us operationally as well as in terms of our capital management. So yeah, I think it's a great outcome. Terrific work. Kudos to Adam and his team for their efforts to initiate this several months back. And as I said, I appreciate and applaud the efforts to work with us to get us to a point where everyone now feels very comfortable in bringing this forward as not only appropriate, but the best of several alternative paths. So, yep, I'm certainly supportive as well.
Mr. Chairman, I think it's also important to recognize that the NYPA pension fund is in good stead and therefore allowing this to happen. So that's a good stewardship on behalf of that aspect of the NYPA pension fund.
Very good point, Michael. I think it's also clear to Adam's point that the trust that was set up was prior to the enactment of the GASB accounting treatment. Right, and that positioned NIPA effectively to be able to absorb that accounting change. And there was no trust that existed at the Canal. So therefore, we're having to do this extra effort to minimize, as John has alluded to, minimize the impact on our balance sheet, but also make sure that we are being responsible to the employees at the Canal.
And just for clarity on Michael's point, this isn't the pension trust, the retirement trust. There are separate trusts here. This is the other post-employment, which Adam said up front is code for healthcare.
Thank you.
So
Yeah.
this is post-employment healthcare that Canal employees, former and present Canal employees have and will receive. That's being funded here. The retirement plan in that trust is separate. As you said, we're very well positioned there as well, but we're even better positioned under this program. So no, they don't get commingled, separate trusts that are maintained. So yeah, again, Trace, if we're at a point where you want to entertain a motion to
I do, yes. So if you
approve the recommended transfer, so moved as presented.
Second.
Moved and seconded, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Adam. We'll now turn to Trish Lombardi, VP of Project Management, to present the next 7 items regarding our utility operations. Trish?
Thanks, Chairperson Tracy. Tracy, is it all right I ask for a vote after each one, or do you want to do them at the end?
Why don't we do them at the end, unless they're ones that are particularly problematic, just so we can make up
Sure.
some.
Thank you. So good morning, everyone. As mentioned, I'm here. My name is Patricia Lombardi. I'm the Vice President of Project Management, and I'm here today to present to you 7 items on behalf of utility operations. The first is the capital expenditure authorization for the Marcy to New Scotland transmission upgrade project. Today, we're requesting that the Finance Committee recommend a capital expenditure authorization in the amount of $208.3 million to Board of Trustees for continued work on the Marcy to New Scotland transmission upgrade project, formerly referred to as the AC Transmission Project. The authority jointly pursued development of this project starting in 2016 with LS Power and submitted responses to the AC Transmission Public Policy Transmission Needs Project solicitation issued by the NISO. Subsequently, a participation agreement was entered into by both parties in mid-2018. In April 2019, the NISO Board of Directors selected the project as the winning proposal for Segment A of the transmission need. Approval to construct the project is required from the Public Service Commission. We're currently on the preliminary agenda for the January 21st meeting, with construction scheduled to commence next month. The total cost for the entire Segment A transmission upgrade project is $750 million. NIPA has filed and FERC has approved a project cost of $280.9 million, or 37.5% of this total $750 million project cost. And this covers NIPA's portion. LS has also submitted and received FERC approval for the balance of the funds to complete the project. This project has been brought before the Committee and Board of Trustees previously on 3 occasions, starting in December 2016, with the original request for capital funds pursuant to an MOU to develop the project. Secondly, in May 2019, after the project was selected, the board approved the release of capital funds to support permitting, design, and planning costs. And most recently, in July 2020, where board approval was granted to pursue a 37.5% ownership stake in the overall project. To support project implementation, the trustees have approved capital expenditures in the amount of $31.1 million to date. At this time, the total project estimate at completion for NIPA's portion is currently expected to come under budget at $239.4 million. As such, at this time, staff is requesting the release of only an additional $208.3 million to support final engineering, property acquisition, procurement and construction of the transmission line upgrades at the Marcy substation, and the remaining system upgrades to the connecting transmission owners. These costs will continue to be assessed as the design and construction progresses, If additional funds are required, a future request to release all or a portion of the remaining 40 million will be made to the committee and to the board. I'll now turn it over to Adam Barsky to review the estimated financial benefits.
Thank you, Trish. On the bottom right of the chart, you can see a graph that shows the blue bars as to the capital expenditures going out to support the project. And then you will see in the green, both on an annual and in the lighter shaded green, cumulative recovery and benefits over a period of time of the project, which represents the payback and the return. And the thing we want to highlight about this project, because we think it will look a lot more like some of our future projects that we'll be doing under the new authority. This particular project, we did receive an approval to start getting money back during construction work in progress. Previously, most transmission projects, you put in all the money through construction, you don't receive anything during that period, and only when it goes into equipment, plant, and service do you start to recover with a return. In this project, we'll actually be getting the money as we are spending it, some of the money as we are spending it that represents our return, and then we'll get the cost recovery when it's completed. And additionally, in this project, we were able to also successfully get an additional return to our return on equity from 945 to 995, which improves our overall weighted average cost of capital by 25 basis points. So it provides a 10-year payback, and the NPV over the project is $380 million. So it represents a good return for the investment that the authority is making. And this is in line with best practices right now in the industry. So we're happy to have this project, and for both the policy standpoint as well as the financial aspects as it is for the authority.
Thanks, Adam. Trish, as I understand it, we'll be getting returns at the same time we're making allocations toward the construction. But just so we're clear, for the committee, this is obviously part of, the committee and the board had approved our portion, our equity portion of this contribution to this project previously. This is the final, submission or release of the amount that we'd approved when you submitted the participation in the bid, the original bid, correct?
That's correct. This is expected to be the final tranche of capital funds needed to complete the project.
And the good news is, at this point, you think the project has the potential to come in under budget, or at a minimum, 4 years later, you're all the more comfortable with the budget that was originally anticipated and presented to us.
At this time, yes, as mentioned, construction will start in February, so there's still
Right.
risk out there, but at this time, we feel comfortable with what we know and this number, yes.
So the pandemic, obviously, to date, hasn't really impacted us and its ability to navigate the ramifications of that going forward.
At this time, not to a significant extent, no.
Okay, great.
Great. Thanks, Trish. You want to move on? Any other questions? You want to carry on to the next project?
Sure, thank you. So the next item we have is the capital expenditure authorization for the communications backbone program. Today, we're requesting that the committee recommend a capital expenditure authorization in the amount of $24.8 million to the Board of Trustees for continued implementation and completion of the communications backbone program. The goal of this program, which is foundational to the authority's end-to-end digital strategy and Vision 2030, is to establish a robust, dedicated, resilient, and reliable communications network. This network will enable the authority to replace legacy point-to-point circuits that will eventually need to be retired, manage many intelligent endpoint devices, such as sensors, which are actively being deployed, and the increased data flow from these devices and assets, and provide a backbone network to enhance the capabilities of the local operating control rooms and the ISOC to increase and optimize overall asset performance. The program has 4 major work streams, which include installation of optical ground wire, or OPGW, on the authority's existing transmission lines, upgrading or installation of microwave links, leasing dark fiber, and installation of fiber electronics required to connect the communications infrastructure. Detailed design, equipment procurement, and construction has been ongoing for over 3 years now. A summary of work completed to date is listed on the slide. This includes the installation of over 200 miles of OPGW, over 475 miles of dark fiber leased and connected, execution of a dark fiber lease with the New York State Thruway Authority for an additional 400 miles of dark fiber to connect Niagara to White Plains, and in-progress microwave work in the northern and the southeast regions. In terms of capital funds, this program has been brought before the committee and board on a number of occasions, starting in March 2017, when the trustees approved approximately 20 million. Subsequently, in October 2018, when the board approved 77.5 million. And most recently in December 2019, when the board approved 53 million, bringing the total current authorized amount to 153 million. There are several contracts which were also brought before the board within the same time period for design, equipment, and construction services. As stated, 153 million is the previous total program cost that was presented and approved by the board. Today's request is for approval of additional capital funds above and beyond these previously approved costs. Following the cancellation of a fall 2019 outage and subsequently the cancellation of all the spring 2020 outages and pausing of all contracts due to the COVID-19 pandemic, the program cost and scope were reevaluated, and the total estimate at completion has increased to approximately 178 million for the following reasons. The cost of installation for the OPGW has increased due to outage cancellations, along with additional constraints required for regulatory permits, the addition of aviation subject matter experts, additional contingencies required to install the OPGW during the summer peak season, and additional unplanned efforts required to tie in and connect the OPGW at third-party non-NYPA facilities. Secondly, the cost to implement the Northern New York microwave upgrade has increased due to unforeseen and unplanned station upgrades, as well as a temporary migration to and from the leased dark fiber required for commissioning. Thirdly, additional scope has been added to the program, which includes a new fiber lease connection between Plattsburgh and Albany. The scope has been added as a secondary path out of Northern New York to increase network resiliency. This fiber path was not available and was not an option at the onset of the program. And lastly, due to the unforeseen and unplanned work, the direct and indirect costs to safely and effectively deliver the program have increased. To offset some of the scope and cost increases, OPGW installation on several transmission lines totaling approximately 180 miles in the North Country and connecting to Utica have been descoped to align with future transmission development in the northern and central regions, which were not known at the onset of the program. To date, 153 million in capital funds have been authorized, so the current request of 24.8 million represents the additional funding required to complete the project. Thank you. I'll now take any questions.
So Trish, this is an example, unlike the last project we just talked about, where this is we've gone over the budget, right, of the previously approved amount. Can you help me understand what portion of, I don't know if you can separate out what's this additional request that you're making is an effect of the pandemic as opposed to an adjustment to the scoping of the project? Can you help me understand where that line falls?
I would say it's about 50-50, Chair McKibben. So between the direct and the indirect costs, some which is contributed to pandemic with the schedule pushing out, as well as the indirect policy, I would say that represents about half. And the other half is due to whether scope being added to the program or OPGW installation and the microwave work being more costly than originally anticipated.
Okay. Any other questions?
Clarify for me, Trish, I apologize. So is the 24 million the additional amount, that's the additional amount above and beyond? So 153 was the original contract, or is 24 million the estimate to complete? Which already included some percentage to complete. What's the overrun here? Is the overrun 24 million, or is the overrun something less than that?
Correct. The overrun is 24.8 million.
Okay,
Our
so the full
previous,
amount that you're asking.
correct. Yes, that is the overrun. Yes.
Okay.
Any other questions? Okay, Trish, you want to continue?
Sure. Thank you. The next item is the capital expenditure authorization for the Transmission Life Extension and Modernization Program, Niagara Switchyard LEM. Today, we're requesting that the committee recommend a capital expenditure authorization in the amount of $121 million to the Board of Trustees for continued work and completion of the TLEM Niagara Switchyard LEM project. The scope of work for this project includes replacing and upgrading transmission equipment in the Niagara Switchyard. Design, equipment procurement, and construction has been ongoing for over 5 years now. To date, we've replaced 2 auto transformers, 16 115 kV circuit breakers, 9 230 kV circuit breakers, the 115 kV bus, disconnect switches, and other ancillary equipment. Construction is scheduled to be completed in 2025, subject to approved outages. The remaining activities include replacement of 2 auto transformers, 26 circuit breakers, 13 8 kV switchgear, additional disconnect switches, and other ancillary equipment. The TLEM program has been brought before the board on numerous occasions starting in 2012. In terms of capital funds, this TLEM project at Niagara was brought before the board once previously in May 2014, where approval was granted for capital funds in the amount of $154.7 million. In support of this major project, the Board of Trustees has also approved a number of design, equipment, and construction services contracts since 2014. Today's request is for a release of capital funds required to complete the project. Staff anticipates 2 remaining major contracts to award to complete the project as listed on the slide. The total project estimate that was previously presented to the board was $267 million. Due to an increase in the capital indirect allocation, the total estimate has been increased by $9 million to $276 million. So as mentioned previously, to date, $154.7 million in capital funds have been authorized. So the current request of $121 million represents the total funding required to complete the project. This total project cost is included in the overall $726 million estimated for the TLEM program, which is currently on track to be completed by 2025. Thank you. I'll take any questions.
Trish, we've talked about, and we've got your next project you're going to talk about is also TLEM, just helping us understand. Obviously, TLEM is a large umbrella for a number of projects, and you divide it up regionally. So we've approved previously it wouldn't have been 275 because this is the final cost of the project, and we've slightly gone over budget. It seems to me, if I understand what you've said for this particular project, but this is just a portion of a larger approval that the board had done for all of the TLEM maintenance projects, correct?
So correct. In December 2012, when TLEM was first presented to the board, it was indicated at that time, since it was such a large program, very geographically diverse, that the program would be divvied up into different projects across the region, and we would return to the board for different capital fund approvals and contracts based on how that program was subdivided. So for Niagara specifically, in May 2014, staff had come to the board requesting approval for the first tranche of money, that $154 million, but had advised the board that at that time, we expected the full project to cost $267 million. So today we're pretty much on track with those original estimates. There is a slight increase there of $9 million, which is mostly attributed to the capital indirect increase.
Any other questions?
Maybe just clarify or educate us, Adam, on the capital indirect allocation.
Yes, sure, Mr. Chairman. So we had earlier last year, we had gone through a detailed study and methodology methodology to update how we go about allocating our indirect overhead costs to capital projects and bring it in line with industry standards and norms. And as a result of that study, we adjusted upward the overhead allocation factor for NIPA work done on capital projects. So the rate has gone up and impacts the total cost of the project, but it's somewhat of a geography issue in terms of going from the operating budget to the capital budget.
Right. Okay, and that's a function of incremental cost or a function of just a change in methodology? I mean,
it's using a standard methodology that looks at capacity and costs on the operating side, costs on the capital side, but people's work in terms of how it's being organized. And based on the update, because it had not been updated in quite some time, the authority has really changed over the last several years to become obviously more capital intensive, and a lot more of our work around the authority is more towards supporting capital programs than it is just operating and maintenance on a regular basis. So it really called for the recognition of that update to bring it in line with, again, industry norm, industry standards. So after we had performed the study, we came up with the new percentage. We then checked that with the LPPC, to see other public power utilities, as well as other state authorities, and we found that our rate was in line and where the other comparators are.
so that would impact all projects.
Correct, except those that are specifically negotiated. So some projects like the LS Power, for example, the overhead allocation rate was an item of negotiation between NIPA and its partner as part of their contractual, obligations to each other. But barring a contractual agreement to an allocation rate for other NIPA solely controlled projects, yes, the rate will apply across the board.
And again, not to get too conceptual, so while it's an increase in cost to this project, it's not an increase in cost to NIPA. Our net cash outlay hasn't been increased. It's either in the operating budget, as you said, or it's in the capital budget. So this is a left pocket, right pocket move. So it's not an overrun in terms of actual out-of-pocket spend by NIPA. It's
right. You're absolutely correct.
Okay. So project management, this isn't a reflection of project management. I'll say in contrast to the prior one, where there are reasons we actually have to spend an additional $24 million to complete the project. Here, we aren't spending an additional $9 million to complete the project. We've merely allocated $9 million of additional costs that we otherwise are spending to this project.
That's correct. It's really a geography issue.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Thanks for that.
That was a helpful clarification. Any other questions? All right, Trish, on to your fourth and next project.
Sure, thank you. The next item is the capital expenditure authorization for the TLEM program, Niagara Switchyard Protective Relay Replacement Project. Today, we're requesting that the committee recommend a capital expenditure authorization in the amount of $18.3 million to the Board of Trustees for continued work and completion of the TLEM Niagara Switchyard Protective Relay Replacement Project. The scope of work for this project includes relay upgrades to the new or upgraded equipment in the Niagara Switchyard. Design, equipment procurement, and construction has been ongoing for over 5 years now and is coordinated with the work described in the previous item to take advantage of common outages and resources required to complete the work. To date, we have upgraded relays associated with equipment in 9 bays of the switchyard and the 115 kV bus sections. Construction is scheduled to be completed in 2025, subject to approved outages. The remaining activities include upgrading relays in 5 bays and the 230 kV bus sections. Similar to the previous item, this project is part of TLEM. This project has been brought before the board once previously in December 2012 for the approval of capital funds in the amount of $25.9 million. The majority of the work required to implement this project is performed by Authority Craft personnel. As such, staff anticipates one remaining equipment procurement contract to complete the project. Today's request is for a release of capital funds required to complete the work. The total project estimate that was previously presented to the board was $52.2 million. Based on lessons learned and efficiencies gained, the total estimate has been decreased by $8 million to $44.2 million. As stated earlier, to date, $25.9 million in capital funds have been authorized, so the current request of $18.3 million represents the total funding required to complete the project. Same as the previous item, the total project cost is included in the overall $726 million estimated for the TLEM program. Thank you. I'll take any questions.
And is that 8 million under budget inclusive of the increase in capital allocation? So in terms of an actual out-of-pocket savings, it's even more than the 8 million?
Yes, that's correct.
Got it. Okay, great.
Any other questions? Okay, Trish, continue.
Thank you. The next is the capital expenditure authorization and contract award for the Blenheim Gobowa unit circuit breaker replacement project. Today, we're requesting that the committee recommend a capital expenditure authorization in the amount of approximately $10.5 million, an approval of a 4-year furnish, deliver, and install contract to ABB Enterprise Software Incorporated in the amount of approximately $1.5 million to the Board of Trustees for the unit circuit breaker replacement project at BG. Following a catastrophic sudden failure in September 2018, the unit circuit breaker for BG Unit 1 was replaced and the unit returned to service in May 2019. Following a root cause analysis and to mitigate the risk of additional failures, the scope of this project includes the replacement of the remaining 3 unit breakers. The project includes 3 major components: a separate design, furnish, and deliver contract with ABB for 3 breakers plus 1 spare, removal of the existing breakers and installation of new breakers by BG Site Resources, and the design, furnish, deliver, and install contract with ABB, which is put before you today to disconnect the existing and install new isophase bus work required for the new breakers. Construction is scheduled to be completed in 2024, subject to approved outages. A request for proposal for the isophase bus work was issued in September 2020, and 2 proposals were received in October, which were reviewed by a cross-functional committee. Among other evaluation criteria, the bids were reviewed based on cost, technical and commercial requirements, quality, relevant experience, including the firm's safety records, and compliance with the new NERC CIP 13 requirements, which involve an in-depth review of supplier risk for power equipment related to the bulk electric system and the cyber systems embedded or associated with these assets. Following an extensive evaluation process, the committee recommends award to ABB in the amount of approximately $1.5 million for a 4-year term. In accordance with the authority's policies and procedures, a limited notice to proceed in the amount of $200,000 was issued in December to commence the design work required to meet this outage-constrained project schedule. The total project estimate is $10.8 million. To date, $250,000 in capital funds have been approved, so the current request of $10.5 million will authorize the balance of funds required to complete the project. While this is the first time this project has specifically been brought before the Finance Committee and Board, the proposed spending is included in the 2021 budget and 4-year capital plan approved in December 2020. Thank you. I'll now take any questions.
So Trish, this is an example of helping us, making sure that we understand, what's being approved as opposed to what you're updating us on. While this was part of the larger consideration for the full CapEx budget that the board approved. With regard to this project, this is a new project introduction to the committee and therefore, and ultimately to the board. So just so I make sure, in addition to the approval of this project, we're also approving the contract award that will assist with this project. So there are kind of two items, right? As we look at
Correct.
the role that we play. So it's an initial first approval of the amount that you're requesting for this project, and then the contract award for the project. I want to make
Correct.
sure we understand as we look at our chronology of participation for the committee and for the board as we review these projects. Great.
Yes, that's absolutely correct.
So we're authorizing the full 10.5 and approving the 1.5.
Yes.
Correct.
Okay. And at this point, you have no reason to believe the total scope of the project will vary from the original estimate of 10.5 or 10.8.
That's correct. We do have experience with the work. As mentioned, we did replace one, albeit that was an emergency basis. We do have experience with the work, so we feel comfortable with the estimates. Yes,
The original estimate still holds.
correct.
Great. Okay.
Great. Okay, Trish, the next one.
Sure. Great. The next item is the capital expenditure authorization and contract award for the St. Lawrence FDR Power Project, Longsu Dam Positive Restraint Barrier Project. Today, we're requesting the committee recommend a capital expenditure authorization in the amount of approximately 11.8 million and the approval of a 2-year design build contract to Whole Industrial Incorporated in the amount of approximately 8.1 million to the Board of Trustees for the Longsu Dam Positive Restraint Barrier Project. The Federal Energy Regulatory Commission mandated that the authority install an upstream positive restraint barrier system to ensure safety and minimize unauthorized access. The scope of this project includes a geotechnical study of the riverbed, design and installation of an approximate 4,500-foot barrier made of composite material and required anchors, and a boat launch to support installation and future maintenance. This barrier system will remain in place all year round and will not be removed seasonally. Due to the criticality of this project, barrier installation is required to be completed by October 2021. A request for proposal was issued in October 2020, and 2 proposals were received in December, which were reviewed by a cross-functional committee. Among other evaluation criteria, the bids were reviewed based on cost, technical and commercial requirements, quality, and relevant experience, including the firm's safety record. Following an evaluation process, the committee recommends award to Whole in the amount of 8.1 million for a 2-year term. In accordance with the authority's policies and procedures, a limited notice to proceed in the amount of 1 million was issued in December to commence the geotechnical studies required to meet this aggressive project schedule. The total project estimate is 12.8 million. To date, 1 million in capital funds has been approved, so the current request of 11.8 million will authorize the balance of funds to complete the required project. While this is, again, similar to the previous item, this is the first time that the committee has seen this specific project. The proposed spending is in the 2021 budget and in the 4-year capital plan. Thank you. I'll take any questions.
Trish, is there a downstream positive restraint barrier project as well?
Not for this location, Judge.
Great.
In Vischer Ferry and Crescent, we do have programs there where there are
Both
downstream and
sides.
upstream barriers. Yes, but not at this location.
And your 12.8 is the original project estimate, so that hasn't
Correct.
changed.
Correct.
And that's inclusive of the additional cost allocation? From
Yes, correct. Yes.
So in fact, you're bringing the project under original budget.
This is the first time we've put the estimate out there. So this is the estimate with the allocation as it currently is per policy.
Got it.
Yeah, in terms of, helping us understand, this is an original authorization, right? And then approval of a contract under that authorization.
Correct.
So even though the project was initiated in 2019, this is the first time you're asking for any dollar authorization.
Correct. Similar to other capital programs, we do have a limited amount of spending that is approved below the board's threshold to get started, start planning. And then now at the time ready for execution, we'll bring it to the board as it's across the threshold for board approval.
We give you a limited allowance.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you.
If you're gonna
Not to get yourself in trouble.
Right, exactly, all right. If you're gonna get us in trouble, we're all going with you, all right?
I'll try not to. I'll try not to.
Okay, no other questions, Trish? I think you're one more project that
One
you
more.
want to present.
Sure, thank you. The next and final item is the shaft procurement contract award in support of the mechanical and electrical upgrades project, the Next Generation Niagara program. Today, we're requesting the committee recommend approval of a 15-year equipment contract in the amount of $18.1 million to GE Renewable US, including a waiver of Article 22, steel components from the agreement, to the Board of Trustees at the January meeting. The contract scope includes the design, manufacture, and delivery of 13 shafts and 1 thrust runner in support of the Next Generation Niagara program. This program has been brought before the committee and Board of Trustees on 2 previous occasions, starting in July 2019, where the overall program estimate of $1.1 billion was approved and a total of $224 million in capital funds were authorized. At that same meeting, 2 major contracts were approved. Subsequently, a 3rd major contract was approved at the December 2020 board meeting. The proposed spending for this contract for the shafts is in alignment with the original program estimate. It's included in the 4-year capital plan and is already included as part of the capital funding authorization already approved by the trustees. A request for proposal was issued in March 2020 and 7 proposals were received in June, which were reviewed by a cross-functional committee. Among other evaluation criteria, the bids were reviewed based on cost, technical and commercial requirements, quality, as well as the relevant experience, including the firm's safety records. As part of the bidding process, vendors were asked to submit both their best value proposal and alternatively, if that was not a US sourced option, vendors were asked to submit an optional price to source and manufacture the shafts in the US. The responses we received from the 7 vendors ranged from $16 million to $50 million. And of the more competitive proposals, the option to source the shafts in the US was approximately 50 to 80% higher in cost than the foreign option. As such, following an extensive evaluation process, the committee recommends award to GE Renewable US in the amount of approximately $18.1 million for a 15-year term, including a waiver of Article 22, steel components from the contract agreement language. The total Next Generation Niagara program estimate remains at $1.1 billion. To date, the trustees have authorized $224 million. This $18.1 million contract commitment is included in this current capital authorization. As such, we are not requesting the release of any additional capital funds today. Thank you. I'll take any questions.
So Trish, as you know, we've talked quite a bit about this particular project for, one reason being the amount of it. It's a very significant and large project. And also, our efforts around trying to make sure that we use, in-state participants and contractors for our work. And what, as you've explained to us, you've gone through extra efforts to make sure that we understood that the bid that we agreed to is one that is realistic. And, there's no concern about being underbid and giving the participants the opportunity to submit their best and finest. And so can you walk us through a little bit about those extra efforts that you made? Because again, looking at the size of this contract and making sure that we want to do our part to work with in-state contractors, that unfortunately with this one, the significant gaps in between the submissions was one that, where the team, I think we as a committee will agree was the best for NYPA in terms of moving forward.
Certainly. As mentioned, and you see on the slide, 7 proposals were received in June. So, which is a good number of proposals. It's a healthy number. And you see we're here today in January 2021, 6+ months later, with the award, because we've taken all that time really to do the due diligence. So there's been interviews conducted, quality reviews done of the vendors that were in the more competitive range, to make sure that we were getting the best value. And as I mentioned, we did go through the effort to ask the vendors to give us your best value. And if that was not a US sourced option in compliance with Article 22 of the agreement, give us a price to source and manufacture in the US. And just the pricing difference was significant between those options. And GE Renewables is a firm, we're now familiar with. Just a clarification, it is an American company. They are headquartered in Massachusetts. They do have a number of offices worldwide, but they are an American company. They recently did
But it is
receive.
not GE.
I'm sorry.
It's not GE as most of us
Correct.
think GE.
Correct. It's changed a bit over the years. We do also now have a bit of familiarity with GE. They did receive the recent award for the Wicket Gates, which was approved in December. So it's a relationship that we're certainly building. And in terms of shafts, the authority does have experience in this line of work, as the LPGP LEM program, which is still ongoing, but we're close to the end. New shafts had been procured and manufactured as part of that program. So we do have experience with this line of work.
And just to repeat, you said if, you asked for the bids, assuming domestic production, and they were 50 to 80% higher?
Correct. Of those that were in the more, let's say 7 proposals, so there were 3 or 4 proposals that were more clustered together and more in the competitive range. Of those, their alternate price to source in the US was ranged from 50 to 80% higher than their foreign option.
So if I assume that cluster, just to confirm the obvious, that cluster is plus or minus 20 million, you're saying those bids came back at 30 to 35 million.
Correct.
Wow. Okay.
Great, thanks. Any other questions on this one?
One last point of education, Trish. So as you mentioned, 7 bidders, this was actively bid. To me, that's the good news. Typically, we seem to struggle to get qualified bidders. Is that just the nature of this work or the nature of the provider versus a lot of the other work that's done? Why was this more actively bid?
I think what we see in this hydro space, it's a similar vendor pool that we saw with the Wicket Gates. It's that same pool of hydro, power generation that really go after these projects. And if they don't bid as the prime, they team up with somebody. So there's a lot of name recognition there with these same vendors. And I think not that this is routine type of work, but in the hydro industry, there's more of this work than say, putting in a, tower painting, our favorite example. So I think it's just that the vendor pool, the hydro pool, it's there, and there's a lot of interest, the same players we see normally when we bid this type of generation type work.
Okay, thank you. So Tracy, you want a motion or a combined motion to approve the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, whatever it is?
Correct. So there are a number of approvals as well as authorizations. And so this is a motion to recommend it to the full board, which we will have at the full board meeting will be ultimately approved, but to submit for board adoption. 7 projects that we've gone through. So if I could get a motion, if there are no other questions.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carried. These will be, as I said, we're recommending these to the full board for ultimate adoption.
And Tracy, one last little editorial as I was on my own little scorecard here.
Yep.
Those 7 add up to something north of 400 million of projects. And I'll say kudos to Trish and the team, at least by my tabulation, for all the back and forth on overruns and the like. my numbers, add up to a net positive in terms of, the potential cost savings for us. So again, further displaying what's an incredible core competency for this organization to be able to manage complex, multi-year, long-term, and high-cost projects very efficiently and very effectively. So kudos to Trish, Joe, and Adam, and everybody else involved. Well done.
I agree.
Thank you.
Good job.
Thank you.
Thank you. With that, you have before you the consent agenda, which includes the minutes of our last meeting. And if I could get a motion to adopt the consent agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any
Aye.
opposed? Motion carries. The date of the next Joint Finance and Risk Committee meeting will be held on March 18th, 2021. At this point, if I could get a motion to close this meeting.
So moved.
In a second.
Second.
Second. Moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carried. Thank you, everyone. Have a good
Thank
day.
you.
Thanks very much,
Very
Trace.
helpful.
Well done. Thanks, everybody. Have a
Thank
great
you.
day.